Steve Aglash here.
Wolfvogel present.
Melton present.
Foster present.
All present.
Cheng present.
Let's see, any oral communications? Seeing yes, come on up.
And I also have a document. Is it okay if I approach? Or? Good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I'm Catherine Martineau. I'm the Executive Director of Canopy. And I wanted to update you on a letter that I have, that you have received from Canopy about 3 weeks or so ago. The letter was meant to draw the attention of the city on some concerns that Canopy has regarding the welfare of the urban forest and the overall green infrastructure of the city in the wake of further conservation measures for water, basically. So you have received a letter. There's nothing new about the letter itself, but what is new is that last week I received a response to this letter from City Manager Jim Keane, and I wanted to draw your attention to this response. It's a very nice letter. It's very, gives us great hope that we are going to be able to conserve and protect the forest and also make sure that we have water resources in the long term. So, for example, the city manager reinforces that we are committed to maintaining a healthy, vibrant urban forest, that he will direct or has directed the urban forester to work with Canopy, but also with the utilities department in order to find programs or solutions that will help us achieve those two goals. So this is all very positive and we're pleased. There are two things that I wanted to mention, however. The first one is that one request that we had in our letter was that the city consider alternative rate structures for the water rates. We are worried that with the increase, very dramatic increase in water rates that is needed to cover the costs, there is an incentive or that the residents are encouraged to conserve further with maybe the promise or implied or understood promise that they will save money if they don't water their landscape as much. We are a little bit worried about that. There are alternative rate structures that exist. For example, in Southern California, the Irvine Ranch Water District uses a budget-based water rate structure, and we would like the city to examine whether this would be a good solution for Palo Alto. The other thing is that in this letter, there are no timelines, there are no milestones, and I'm hoping to meet with the urban forester, Walter Passmore, very soon and come up with some kind of a calendar. And I will communicate that to you, and I hope that I can enlist your support to make sure that those goals and those milestones are reached, and that you can help monitor them as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Ms. Martineau, and thank you for your work with Canopy.
You're very welcome.
Okay, next up, no more oral communications, no. Next up is approval of the minutes. Anyone have comments on the minutes?
I move approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passed. Anyone have any agenda review and revisions? Hearing none. Reports from commissioner meetings, events. Anyone have anything in that area? Okay. Director of Utilities report.
Thank you very much. Valerie Fong, Utilities Director. Hope you all had a happy Halloween. A few things I wanted to update you on. Demand response pilot. As you recall, we were running a demand response pilot program. We wrapped up the summer 2013 demand response pilot program on October 15th. There were 5 events that were called over the course of the season, 3 of which occurred in the first week of July. 7 large commercial participants, including Park, HP VA Hospital, Palo Alto Office Center, SAP, and CPI participated. Together, those participants committed demand reductions of 600 kilowatts and were able to save nearly 9,000 kilowatt hours during demand response events. Those participants received certificates of appreciation from the city at the October 30th facilities managers meeting. The pilot will continue next summer, beginning May 1, 2014. We also worked with a local startup called Recargo to test demand response for electric vehicles. Text messages were sent to registered EV owners, asking them not to charge during the demand response events. Preliminary data indicated some level of energy reduction, but a larger data set will be needed before any conclusions can be drawn. Communications update. In October, we ran our Public Utilities Awareness campaign. In addition to utility bill and newspaper ads, we also provided information and giveaways to hundreds of people at various events around town. And you got to preview our There Will Be staff video, and it got over 300 hits. In October, it's also our Call Before You Dig campaign, our pirate-themed effort to raise awareness about using the 811 service, including TV ads, print ads, and several Halloween-related events culminated in a performance of our Call Before You Dig theme song before the council on November 4th. We will continue this campaign year-round. Eco Home, Haunted House. Over 200 children and adults explored the many booths at our Halloween event and got their fill of both candy and conservation. The Graveyard of Dead Technologies was popular, as were the Pirate booth, offering the chance to sing Call Before You Dig, It's a Yo-Ho, Yo-Ho kind of a song on camera, and the Safety Detective Penguin booth, where kits enabling kids to make their homes safer were gobbled up like candy. Tours of the Eco Home itself mixed resource efficiency education with horror, such as a cackling pumpkin man that burst forth from a high-efficiency toilet. An additional positive aspect of this event was our coordination with Public Works and libraries, who also had educational entertainment on site. The water supply situation, on a little more serious note, although it's very early in the water year, it's off to a very dry start, and water supplies and storage are less than at this time last year. In addition, there are concerns that ash and exposed soil from the rim fire could lead to water quality impacts in the case of a very quick spring runoff event. We're monitoring the situation, and it's still too early in the water year to predict the amount of hydroelectric generation that can be expected, but again, we're continuing to monitor the situation. Last item, and in the absence of tonight, in the absence of the chair, we may be either seeking the chair or the vice chair to help us out here in accordance with the bylaws, but we are developing a new way to present the financial forecast for each of the funds, and we have plans to provide a draft financial plan template to the UAC in December or January. We'd like the assistance of an ad hoc committee of the UAC as our plans are being developed. Again, it's just a kind of compressed time frame where we'd need some help. The committee could also assist in the review of the CIP and operating budgets, as it has been done in past years. So we'll go through the chair or the vice chair and see if they would be willing to appoint at least one of you, but maybe 2 would be great to help us with this.
Can we just discuss that briefly right now and do it? The obvious people are the folks who served on the budget ad hoc committee last year, which, unless I'm mistaken, are Commissioners Melton and Waldfogel. Am I remembering correctly?
I believe that was the case. Maybe
So
maybe they'd be willing to help us out again. It's,
Done.
Thank you very much. And that concludes my report. Although maybe they wanted me to keep talking because it looks like we don't have quite our technology stuff back up.
I was wondering if the director could say yo-ho-ho again.
No, but you know what? We actually do have somebody who knows a yo-ho-ho song, who wrote the yo-ho-ho song. And if you ask her, she will do it. And it is pretty funny. Actually, we have also other performers in our midst who were very involved.
Okay, I assume we have no unfinished business that anyone knows about, so let's move on to agenda item number 1 of new business, and that is staff presentation on the city's fall 2013 RFP for renewable energy projects.
So for the viewing audience, we may need to apologize since we are seeming to have some technical difficulties here. We may need to just work off the hard copy.
Well,
Senior-
and is there any logic to reordering our order here or
Well,
not?
I think that the father with the 2 young kids would prefer to go home.
Okay.
And the rest of us are willing to stick it out. So perhaps we'll let Senior Resource Planner Jim Stack walk us through, and we'll do the hard copy. And if our singer down there is able to get the electronics back up, we'll handle that.
Okey doke.
Let's, if you don't mind, we'll ask you if it's possible to switch 1 and 2. Oh, you're 2. Carla wasn't going to be here. And see if you actually want the presentation, or you just want to have a quick discussion, or how you'd like to
So I
proceed.
say it's fine. I assume no one objects to switching 1 and 2. With respect to the presentation, I personally do not believe we need a presentation on 2, but if any, 2 is the various gas rate adjustments. Does anyone on the UAC believe we need a presentation on this topic?
Just killing a rate that nobody has taken.
Exactly. We're eliminating a rate that no one uses and making sort of conforming changes elsewhere.
That is correct.
Here, I'll if you'd like, I will move to approve the staff recommendation on number 2. Is that a good enough motion? Specifically to, I mean, it's 3 points here. Terminate the city's natural gas direct access program by repealing gas rate schedule G4, and then eliminate, repeal gas rate schedules G11 and G12, and then make various conforming changes as noted. For example, in the 21 pages of definitions, which I'm sure we could review one by one, but we'll probably skip that for now. That's my motion. Oh, sorry.
So, Chair, I had a couple of non-substantive, one non-substantive comment. But
Bring it on.
It probably would not affect.
So one quick moment of procedure. I think we second before we discuss.
All right.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, but hold on a second. So wait, if we have a second, now we discuss. Now we discuss. Okay, that's right. Go ahead.
So the only comment I had was really a non-substantive one. That is, I noticed that in the definition set, the very long definition set, there is nothing on transportation or distribution. And I realize that there's some complexity there because it could apply to gas or electric. But in the context of gas, I think it might be helpful because in the G1 rate schedules, the G8s and the others, you have an element in the rate schedule there that, well, there's the commodity, there's the transportation and the distribution piece additive to the total rate. And I think that some customers might be perhaps confused as to what the transportation distribution is. Maybe especially so because now we're not having any rate schedule element that explicitly, as far as I know, maybe the electric generation part is the exception G8, but there's no other category that has a PG&E or a PG&E transportation or distribution element to it. So the point would be that if someone had to read the rate schedule, perhaps they might think that the transportation and the distribution element applies to PG&E's part, but as I understand it, does not. Those elements are wrapped into your overall rate, and then you have a transportation and a distribution piece which is internal to Palo Alto. So I think the definitions would help.
Thank you very much. We can make those corrections the next time we submit this in for cleanup, and hopefully they can be adopted as they are now.
Yep. That's okay, yeah.
Any other comments? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, carries unanimously. Director Fong, are we ready to go back to number 1? Or do you want to go on to number 3?
It looks like we're almost there.
Okay. Should we engage in light banter while we wait?
If you wanted to hear our song,
Oh, we could never,
is that a hesitance to actually?
I'm happy to sing, but I'm not a good multitasker, so I can't sing and
We would, of course, love the performance, but in the interest of letting Mr. Stack get home to his 2 young children, I guess we'll proceed with the agenda. Oh, you spoiled it.
All right, good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for having me here tonight. So I'm here to give you a quick overview of where we stand with respect to our renewable energy procurement efforts and meeting our RPS and carbon neutrality goals, and also to discuss the results of a recent RFP we issued for new renewable energy projects. And we're requesting no action with this item, but I just wanted to give you an informational item here. Okay. So I'll quickly go over our existing portfolio of resources and show you how we stand with respect to meeting our RPS and carbon neutrality goals. And then I'll talk about some of the reasons we have for why we issued a new RFP for renewable energy recently, and then I'll go over those results from that RFP. So the first slide here shows a pie chart of where we expect our resources to be coming from in the year 2017. We have an annual load of about 1,000 gigawatt hours, and in an average hydro year, a little over half of that is expected to come from our large hydro resources. In addition, we have 2 wind projects and 4 landfill projects that are currently operating, and they're currently supplying about 21% of our needs. In addition, we have 1 more landfill project that's expected to come online within the next 2 months or so, and that's pretty much a sure thing, and that is expected to supply about 3% of our needs. And then beyond that, we have 4 solar contracts that we've committed to in about the last 12 months. And altogether, those would supply about 23% of our needs. However, to be totally honest, the outcome of those contracts is a little bit uncertain at this point in time. They're expected to come online, 1 of them in 2014 and 3 others at the end of 2016. A couple of those projects still have to get their interconnection agreements signed, and all 4 of them still need to obtain financing to provide the construction funds for the projects. And in today's market, with the very attractive prices that we sign those contracts for, obtaining financing can be a challenge. So I don't know what the probability is that all 4 of those projects will come to fruition, or whether some of them will end up being terminated, but I'd say there's a likelihood, a possibility that some of those contracts will not end up being built that we've contracted, that we signed already. But if they all were to be built, then those renewable contracts plus our hydro resources in an average year would get us to about 99% carbon neutral. The next slide is one you're probably familiar with, showing our long-term efforts towards growing our renewable energy portfolio, starting in 2003 and going about 35 years. The 2 black lines indicate the amount of renewable energy necessary to meet our 33% RPS target is the bottom line, and then our carbon neutrality goal is the top line. And you can see that in 2017, if all 4 of those solar contracts in orange get built and come online, They would get us to very close to carbon neutrality, assuming average hydro. And then for about 4 years or so, those would be, we would be at roughly at the carbon neutral level with those existing contracts and the hydro resources. And then in 2021, one of our wind projects, the contract expires. So we have the beginning of what we call the cliff, when some of our older contracts start to go away. And we again have a need to obtain more additional resources to maintain our carbon neutral portfolio level. So just looking at this slide, you might ask the question why we chose to issue a new RFP for additional renewable energy, given that we are showing ourselves at being roughly at carbon neutral through long-term renewables and hydro. And there are several factors there, and I've kind of alluded to a few of them already, but the basic motivation is that that graph showing us being at roughly at the carbon neutral level that assumes that all 4 projects, solar projects that we've committed to recently, end up getting built. Excuse me. It also assumes average hydro, which more often than not in the recent period, last 5 or 10 years, we've seen more dry years than we have seen average or wet years. So I don't know if that will continue, but that's been the trend recently. So we have to be prepared to supply some of that or replace some of that large hydro with renewables or other resources. In addition, we believe we're still in a buyer's market for renewable energy. Renewable energy prices are still low, and the results of our RFP confirm that. So we think this is still a good time to be a buyer in this market and locking up more contracts. And then, as I said earlier, some of our older contracts will be expiring starting in 2021, and we'll have a need for more renewable energy then, even if all of our contracts come to fruition, and even if we have an average hydro year. So if all those contracts end up coming to fruition and we have average hydro, I guess the outcome for those 4 years would be that we would end up having to sell some of our hydro or renewables into the market, and we'd reap the revenue from that. So it's not a terrible problem to have some surplus hydro or renewables in our portfolio. So that brings us to the RFP we issued, which went out in September, and the proposals came in about 4 weeks ago. We had, I think, exactly the same number of responses to this RFP as we had a year ago. We had 92 responses, and it was roughly the same breakdown as last year. About 2/3 were solar, about a quarter were wind, and then a small number of other resources made up the rest of the proposals. And again, we had far more energy submitted into our RFP than we could possibly manage to take. The evaluation criteria we used are pretty similar to what we've used in the past, where the major factors are the price of the resource and the viability of the resource, the expectancy we have of the resource being built and being able to deliver energy to us. We also considered the start date, given that we have an RPS target in 2015. We figured and we have 3 projects that are not expected to come online until the end of 2016. We had a bit of a preference for resources that could come online in 2014 or 2015 in this RFP. So next, here's a graph showing the prices of all the 92 proposals that we received. In general, the prices were pretty similar to the prices we saw in the last RFP from 2012. If anything, they were maybe a tad lower. The green premiums here are actually slightly higher than they were a year ago, and that's mainly due to the fact that brown energy prices, the brown market prices, have come down a bit since last year, which makes the green premium a little bit higher for the same renewable energy price. But the actual renewable energy proposed prices were slightly lower than last year, especially at the top end of the stack. The best proposals we had were a little bit lower priced than a year ago. And this next graph kind of illustrates that point. This graph shows the history of our renewable energy project commitments, starting in 2004 with our earliest PPAs. We're plotting here the levelized price of those contracts with the blue diamonds, and the time at which we executed those contracts. So you can see that our earliest contracts were relatively low priced at around $60 a megawatt hour. And then for a few years in 2009 through 2011, we had the renewable energy market went a lot higher. So we signed some contracts for in the range of $100 to $120 a megawatt hour. Although 3 of those dots up there out of those 5 those contracts ended up being terminated. So only 2 of those projects are going to be in our portfolio going forward. And then on the right, in the more recent years, I'm showing there the range of the prices of the top 10, the 10 lowest price proposals in the last 3 RFPs we've issued over the last 3 years. So you can see that over the last 3 years, prices have gradually come down each year, and also the range of prices that we've seen out of the top 10 proposals has gotten narrower. So the competition has increased and liquidity has increased in the market as it has matured, I think. You can also see in blue dots there some of the projects that we ended up signing out of those RFPs. We basically ended up with the lowest priced contracts out of each of the last 2 RFPs. So you can see that as well. And in the far right, you can see that the range is quite narrow for the RFP we just issued. There was about a $2 spread between the best price proposal we received this time and the 10th best proposal. So it's quite a difficult decision we're going to have to select one out of that group. But we got a very good response again this year. So going forward from here, we are in the process of interviewing some of our proposers who made our short list. We have a short list of about 10 projects, and we've been holding interviews with all the proposers from those projects over the past couple of weeks to learn more about them and to help us make our decision about which projects to go with. We're going to be wrapping that up this week, and by next week we hope to select 1, possibly 2 projects out of that group to negotiate a PPA with. And the decision on whether to execute or to negotiate a second PPA and bring that to you for your review in part depends on what happens with the contracts we have under our that we've already executed at this point. And if we see any reason to believe that they will not end up being built, we may lean towards bringing a second contract to you this year out of this RFP. So we expect to bring 1 or 2 contracts to you probably in February, and then take them to the Finance Committee and Council after that for your review. And of course, we'll continue to monitor the progress of the projects we have under contract. So that's all I have. If you have any questions.
I do, but let me turn to my colleagues first. Okay.
So quick question. Thanks for that, Jim. Do we have any development security requirements, especially on those uncertain PV PPAs?
Yes, from the last two RFPs and plus this RFP, we have development securities in place for the 4 solar PV contracts that we've executed over the past year or so. And for this RFP, we have again a development security in place. And it's a little bit higher actually this year in this RFP than it was in previous years due to our desire for a greater level of certainty around the contracts that we'll be executing this year.
What's the security level is there a particular amount?
For the current RFP that we're going to be that we're negotiating with proposers on right now, we have kind of a sliding scale based on when the COD is, when the project is expected to come online. So for 2014 projects, we're asking for $50 per kilowatt, and that goes up to $75 for 2015 projects and $100 for 2016 projects. So kind of a greater level of uncertainty for projects farther out, and we're asking for a little bit more in development security to account for that.
Great. Okay. Thanks.
There is a possibility, depending on how projects develop and what the hydro year is like, that we could, over the next 4 years, end up with surplus power. what's the likely outcome if we end up as a seller of power on the spot market? Are these prices such that we would be in a break-even position?
I think there's a pretty good likelihood of that. Over the past couple of years, as the state RPS target has come into effect, and we're now in the first compliance period of that, we've seen a very active and liquid market develop for bucket 1 and bucket 2 and bucket 3 renewable energy products. These would all be bucket 1, which carry by far the highest premium, and I expect that to continue to be the case in the future years, where we're looking at possibly being surplus. So given the prices that we have these contracts for being fairly low, and the likelihood of a pretty good market still being in existence for bucket 1 resources, which these are, I think there's a good chance we would at least break even by selling them into the market, especially as the RPS targets ramp up. In the period that we're talking about being surplus, the target is gradually stepping up each year. So there's going to be a growing demand for bucket 1 products like this.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gush?
So you're focusing on the 10 best proposals that were submitted?
That's correct.
Did you tell us if those 10 are all PV or what generation technologies they are?
I didn't mention that, but I believe 8 of them are PV and 2 are wind. 2 of them are existing projects they're wind projects currently operating, and the other 8 projects are PV that are being developed.
And obviously, don't answer if I ask a question where the answer is something that shouldn't be discussed publicly. But in evaluating the attractiveness to decide which ones you want to execute contracts with, do you weigh all the different generation technologies equally, or are there any differences between them in terms of your assessment of financing risks or time of day characteristics in the event that the Western grid starts to put prices on different times of day to avoid curtailment problems, or anything?
Sure. In terms of the likelihood of the project being built, or we kind of weigh, we assess a score to each project based on some various factors related to whether they've obtained financing, or whether they've gotten interconnection agreements, whether they have site control, permitting, and so forth, developers' experience. So we kind of give a viability score to each project. And then as far as comparing different resources with each other, we do look at the time of day at which they are going to be generating, and we sort of weight the project's output, the LMP value, the amount of revenue we would receive for the energy that's generated based on the time of delivery. We can't really predict what future LMP values will be when there's more solar on the grid. LMP is a locational marginal price, which is the price that the revenue that we'll receive from the ISO for each specific point on the grid where the project will be located. And the ISO is the independent system operator. Sorry for the jargon. Did that address your question?
Since financing risk weighed heavily in your opening comments about projects we've already contracted that might not be built, which of course would leave us at a significant deficit relative to meeting our targets, can you tell us a little bit more about how you attempt to evaluate financing risk when looking at these new RFPs?
Sure, that's something that we've been trying to suss out over the past couple of weeks while we've been interviewing these organizations. We try to look at where they're expecting to obtain financing, whether it'll be from the company's balance sheet. That's probably our preference, since that's kind of a sure thing that the company will be able to finance their own projects if they have a significant balance sheet to do so. And if they're going to be obtaining financing from third parties, from bringing in tax equity from banks and other investors, we try to look at the relationships they have with investors and banks and their track record for obtaining financing for similar projects that they've done. And then I think along with that, the financing risk, projects that are coming online sooner and they're already ready to go and basically shovel ready, we look at them as having a lower risk of obtaining financing because there's less uncertainty in their models for where prices will be and what financing costs will be. Because projects that are not going to be under construction for 2 or 3 years, there's obviously some uncertainty about what's going to happen to module prices and the cost of financing at the point when they're ready to seek the financing.
Great, thanks. So we heard a minute ago a discussion about what happens if we have more generating capacity than we have demand and we can sell it on the spot market. Can you comment for a minute on the opposite problem where we don't have as much renewable generating capacity as we need to be 100% carbon neutral, maybe because we misjudge the financing risk and some of these projects don't happen, or maybe because we have less than a normal hydro year? Not entirely obvious to me how that weighs in because that's large hydro, but nonetheless it's still carbon zero. So even if we lose large hydro, that doesn't affect our renewable fraction, but of course it does affect our carbon-free fraction. So given that we're trying to be zero carbon, what do we do if we don't have enough zero carbon generation to meet demand?
Well, to meet our carbon neutral goals, we've, I guess, allowed ourselves the flexibility to use short-term renewable energy products like bucket 3 RECs, and there's definitely a surplus of those in the market right now. Prices are roughly at a little over $1 per REC, practically nothing. So I guess the worst case is that we would have to rely on short-term REC purchases to meet our carbon neutral goals for a number of years going forward until we can obtain another PPA for a long-term project to kind of meet our demand for carbon neutral resources with long-term, bucket 1 products. And that's what we're planning on doing this year and next year as well.
So one more question, if I'm not wearing out my welcome here. Presumably, the generation resources that we own, that are in our portfolio, presumably those don't match Palo Alto demand every minute of every day. Presumably, we're using the Western grid to provide additional power when we need it, or to take the power of the resources that we own the rights to when we don't need it. Can you comment on whether those prices, whether we're buying or selling, vary based on time of day, and what your assumptions are for what's going to happen to time of day pricing in the years ahead? I'm thinking about some recent studies that show that as PG&E and other large utilities on the Western grid put more and more solar in place, the cost of having to curtail due to having more generation capacity than the entire Western grid has demand during times of the day is really going to play havoc with prices. And it could, of course, have the consequence of making the value of photovoltaic generation really plummet. And so I guess I'm curious to know what the current situation is in terms of time of day pricing between us and the Western grid. But I guess I'm also curious to hear whether you've contemplated 5 or 10 years from now, whether we could find ourselves in a situation where PV generation becomes much less valuable or even worthless.
Sure, that's something that we have thought about. I'd say as far as current prices go.
And maybe for the benefit of everyone here, maybe you could take a minute to, I use the word curtailment without really explaining what it means, and that's pretty fundamental to my question, so maybe you could take a minute to describe the problem I'm asking about.
I guess curtailment is an issue you face when there's too much generation, either on the whole grid or at a certain location. There's more generation that is needed and can be used effectively. So in certain situations like that, you actually see energy prices being negative in certain areas, which kind of provides a signal to the generators to stop producing or to produce significantly less to kind of balance out the supply and demand for the energy. So in the current market, we see in general that prices are higher during the afternoon hours when PV is generating. But your point is well taken that in the future, if there's a lot more PV on the grid in certain locations or at certain times, there may be periods where prices are lower. I don't think we've. It's difficult to model what prices are going to be in the future, so we haven't really weighed that too much. We've kind of adjusted our weights for time of delivery a little bit this year. As far as curtailment goes in the future, we do have in our contracts the ability to curtail resources. If prices go negative, we can send a signal to the scheduler to turn off the resource, and so we don't suffer the negative price. I'd say going forward, we've heard a little bit out of this RFP about the ability of some of these resources, even PV resources, to provide ancillary services, to provide the ability to regulate them down, to help address the ramping issue as solar comes online, as a lot of solar resources comes online quickly, the supply ramps up, and so there's a market for we could actually earn some value from having the ability to curtail, to turn our resources off. That may actually provide a benefit to Palo Alto in spite of the lack of the lost energy that we would suffer in those situations.
So I think you've answered the question, and I really appreciate that. There's no doubt that ancillary services can help mitigate the problem. There's no doubt that if storage becomes available in large quantities on the grid, that totally eliminates the problem, and that storage could be batteries. It could also be pumped storage, pumping water from one elevation to another. Demand response and things like EV charging can also take care of that. I'll just comment that this problem of curtailment and negative electricity, actually paying people to take the electricity, isn't an abstract problem. It already happens in the evening in North Texas and Oklahoma, and amazingly, it happens in the afternoon in Germany, despite the fact that that's when industrial power consumption is the greatest. They've now installed so much PV that electricity is free, or you get paid to take it in the afternoon. And a recent study by the National Renewable Energy Lab shows that the Western grid, where we are, will have this same problem if current trends of the large utilities deploying PV continue. So I guess I don't want us to overreact, but I would hate to see us assume that PV generation, or for that matter, wind generation, will continue for decades to necessarily have the same value that it has now. The conditions with which we buy and sell electricity to the grid could change over the next several years. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Walfogel.
Thank you, and thank you for thinking ahead. 2021 is just around the corner in utility terms. Commissioner Eglash, I think, was asking questions about very short-term price variations, but let me just step back and ask the long-term question that traditionally we've had a multi-year business model that the productive, the wet hydro years generate surpluses that we can then carry forward to manage rates over subsequent years. And I just want to confirm that that remains our business model, or if we have a different business model in mind.
We're struggling trying to understand the question. Are you talking about the carryover that we kind of talked about in the development of the carbon neutral
Well, in the
plan?
past, we've generated surpluses in the electric fund. I mean, substantial surpluses in the electric fund in wet hydro years, because we have not had to go to the market to purchase the remaining supplies. And so I'm just curious whether that continues to be our model. I mean, in 2019, if that turns out to be a really wet hydro year, will we enjoy the benefits of surpluses, or will we be committed to fixed costs or to initial dispatch of other resources so that we can't build up those surpluses that we've built up historically?
Well, I don't think we'll be operating the hydro plants any differently depending on you know, we in a wet year, we're still going to be building up. It'll cost us a lot less, and in a dry year, it'll cost us a lot more. The issue of how we manage the reserves there is actually a live issue for us right now because we're revising how we're going to be looking at managing the reserves and whether we need a separate reserve just for the hydro itself, which actually we've talked about in the past, but it really, I don't know how relevant it is to the renewable energy procurement plans, because I don't think that, I'm not understanding that.
Well, I think it comes down to commitments on order of dispatch, because if we have the option, if we have the option to take the hydropower and to not take the other power, then our costs for that year for the supply will be lower. And so the question is, will we continue to enjoy the cost benefits of wet hydro years? And is that part of the evaluation model that we're going through with renewable resources?
No, we'll still be optimizing the hydro resources and using that depending on the market price in the future and how we see the amount in storage and what we need. There's a lot of saving of water so that we can dispatch it at the most value. Jim, do you have a better answer?
I think in a wet hydro year, we'll probably enjoy an even greater level of surplus, given that we'll be, not having to buy less energy from the market, as is always the case, but also having an additional amount of surplus renewables that we can sell into the market, because we'll have a surplus.
But historically, those have not been very valuable in the really wet years.
The renewable resources?
No, the surplus.
There's a slight, price difference, in very wet hydro years. Market prices tend to be lower, but if we're selling renewables, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of variation in the renewables prices that we'll see based on the type of hydro year. And Director Fong wants me to remind you that we cannot sell our western hydro resources, so we'll only be selling hydro from our Calaveras plant or from our renewable energy resources. Also, if there's a very wet hydro year, there's also the ability to bank or to carry forward some of our renewable attributes for use towards other future years where it might be drier, for carbon neutral goals or RPS requirements.
On my hard copy handout, I didn't have an image of that cliff chart. I was wondering if you could flip back and put it back up. I just wanted to ask a question around it, following on Commissioner Melton's question. Yeah, so it looks like by 2020, the cliff begins, right? And I'm wondering, in the portfolio that you're looking at now, I'm assuming that some of those projects would come on, in fact, maybe all of the ones that you're seriously considering would come online before 2020. But I'm just observing, this is not so much a question, just observing that the depth of your cliff step down is quite big. And so I'm suggesting that you can maybe take some risk on having a surplus for a couple of years while you have very good offers in hand, as long as you meet all your criteria on financing viability, et cetera, and go for it. Maybe negotiate an extra one or two beyond what you were thinking of with the 2020 timeframe in mind, especially in light of what you advised Commissioner Melton, that the chances are that you would probably cover your costs, maybe even there may be a slight hit to us based on what Commissioner Eglash points out in terms of the softness as the markets mature in solar, but still, I'm looking at that gap and thinking maybe you could up it a bit.
Yeah, thank you. We'll take that under advisement. I also wanted to point out to that point, there's something we've considered doing. I hope I'm not out of line suggesting this, but it's possible to issue an RFP, in the next year or so for projects that wouldn't come online or wouldn't start delivering to us until 2021. So the project might already be built or be coming online in the next year or two, and it could sell its output to somebody else for a few years. And then so we can kind of lock in the price today based on the current market, market factors, and the contract would start in 2021.
Yeah, that could be even better.
couple comments or questions on my side. On the risk issue, one assigns some sort of a risk that a project won't be completed, but then one also has to contemplate the implication of that. And since you mentioned that 2 of the projects you're looking at are wind projects that are already developing, are already delivering, obviously the risk there presumably is 0. But is there generally always some sort of renewable project out there? In other words, if something you're expecting to come online falls through, is it pretty easy to go out and find something else on relatively short notice?
Yeah, I'd say that is. In today's market, it's pretty easy to sign a contract pretty quickly, even for an existing project. You may end up paying a premium for a project if you have a very short, time window where you need that online by. Your supply of projects that can meet that criteria are going to be lower. But at this point, it's relatively easy to issue an RFP and do a contract pretty quickly.
And is the general trend in renewable power prices, I presume, over time has been down at various rates? In other words, it hasn't bounced back up, has it?
It hasn't yet, but that's always something that we're keeping in mind. If we go to a 40% RPS, or if there's more consolidation in the market, prices could rebound.
And so that makes me, if I were analyzing this, I'd say, okay, on any given project, the risk, there might be some risk the project won't come online, but the impact, the cost of that risk, if I risk adjust things, is not that high because I've probably got some other alternative, and that price for that other alternative is probably not much higher. So along those lines, I'm going to throw out sort of an oddball idea that may run a little bit counter to your thinking in terms of going for the safest, lowest risk projects. I actually think it would be beneficial in considering the alternatives to give some weight in a positive way to the more innovative technologies. Now, I realize we have our innovative technology field testing program, and this is certainly not part of that. But in other words, we go out there and buy a solar PV project just like all the others. That's great. We get some renewable power, and that's great. We should absolutely do that. On the other hand, I saw, for example, up there a biomass project. I have no idea what it was, and it obviously did not make the final cut, and I'm not suggesting we should go for things that make no sense financially, risk or otherwise. But I do think, again, I don't know where the biomass is in there, but I would say that and there can be innovative solar PV technologies, there are innovative wind technologies, and so on and so forth. I think it's worth considering if we have an opportunity down the road to do one that makes sense financially and in general, to look hard at doing something like that, because I think for Palo Alto to say, hey, we've helped some new technology come online, we've certainly done it in the past in other areas. In general, Palo Alto has always been a leader in various ways in the renewable power area. I think that would be a good thing. One other comment I was going to make that probably is not necessary to make, and that is I'm not an enthusiastic supporter at this point of landfill to gas projects. I saw none of them make the final cut, so that comment is sort of moot. The City Council has not shown overwhelming enthusiasm for those projects. That's my comment there. Okay, I think that's it on this particular one. Let's move on to, that was agenda item number 1, but of course we had already done agenda item number 2, so we now move on to agenda item 3, which is the CLEAN program.
Utilities Assistant Director.
Let's hold for 1 second. I think we've got a public comment on it. I think Mr. Lewis is looking for a place to write down his whatever, the public comment card. Up there it is. In this particular case, Director Fong, would you like to do public comment first or do your report first?
I think either one's fine.
Okay,
I actually think we're probably
let's do the public comment first.
We're probably fairly well coordinated, I'm thinking. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Foster and Commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity to make comments. And I just want to weigh in on supporting the staff proposal. And I wanted to share a little bit of experience that the Clean Coalition has had. And by the way, my name is Craig Lewis. I'm the Executive Director of the Clean Coalition, which is based here in Palo Alto. Our offices are in Palo Alto Square. And I've had the pleasure of speaking before you in the past, and I'm happy to be here again. I just wanted to share a little bit of experience that the Clean Coalition has working with programs like Palo Alto Clean in other places and also statewide in California. And the experience is that even though Palo Alto Clean has not had any project activity yet, this is not a unique situation. In fact, the state of California has a statewide clean program, and that program was put into place through a law that passed in 2006, became an effective law on January 1st of 2007. It resulted in utility programs with the 3 large investor-owned utilities having active programs in February of 2008. And the first project activity that happened on that program was over 3 years later. The problem was that the price was set at a level that the market required a little time to mature and actually be able to make that price work in an economically viable way. So once that first project got done on the statewide California clean program, many projects followed, and the program capacity was quickly filled up. And I think that the experience here in Palo Alto is going to be the same. The Clean Coalition is working diligently to try to bridge the game that happens in solar project development between project developers and property owners. And the challenge in Palo Alto has been that the property owners are actually very successful here. The properties are very profitable, and property owners are not motivated by making some extra money. And so the premium and the price that's here in Palo Alto would have had, this program would have been filled up if it was in another location. But it's just been a challenge. The utility has put together a very well-structured program. The Clean Coalition is very pleased with it. I think the price is fair, and now we just need to do a little work, and the Clean Coalition is helping to do this work to find the first property owners that will participate. And I'll just leave you with my final comment, which is similar programs in Los Angeles and other places, including Long Island, so from coast to coast, have been extremely successful. Prices that are lower than what's offered here in Palo Alto have been very successful. The program in Los Angeles is 150 megawatts in size. The new mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, is preparing to expand that program to 1,200 megawatts, just to let you know how excited they are about the program in Los Angeles. The program in Long Island, New York, started as a 50 megawatt program. It completely filled up, and they have now expanded that program to 150 megawatts. So there's a lot of potential for programs like these. I would encourage you to accept the staff proposal to keep the program in place pretty much as it is structured today. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and thanks for you. Oh, sure.
Thank you again for coming, for presenting. You made a really interesting comment that it's not economics that is driving developers in Palo Alto around PV projects. So what do you think will drive them? Because I think that's material to our discussion.
I think it's education. It's not that the economics aren't attractive. The economics can be attractive at this price level. It's getting a property owner to really sit down and understand the economics. And I know this sounds kooky, right? Because I did not anticipate this at all to be a bottleneck. And we were very involved in the initial construction and advocacy of getting this program in place. But I think what the Clean Coalition is doing, I've had meetings with 15 property owners, and most of the properties in Palo Alto are owned by a handful of property owners. So it's really controlled by, commercial properties are owned by just a handful of property owners. So it's really getting the folks to sit down and really understand how the program works and how the economics work for them. And there's multiple combinations, permutations here. There can be a third-party owner that leases a rooftop, for example, and the property owner is just getting a new revenue stream for their rooftop, or the property owner can own the project and get the sale of the electricity for their own portfolio account, if you will. So it's an education process, and a lot of the building owners are older, and they're just not that excited about trying to learn something new. Some of the property owners have sons and daughters, and the kids are coming up, and they're a lot more receptive to this, but they still have to go and check in with the parent generation and kind of get final sign-off. But we have some traction with a number of property owners that I think will result in projects within the next few months. And I think that we're also working with the city to put some city-owned property into play, including the parking structures, which are kind of a unique opportunity in Palo Alto because there is no load on the parking structures. So there is no opportunity for doing the parking structures through a net metering program, which Palo Alto also offers. And so the parking structures are really a perfect opportunity to be promoted through the Palo Alto Clean program. We've got nice open rooftops there, solar canopies on those on the tops of those parking structures will provide shaded parking, which is a nice benefit to the folks who use the parking structures. And the only thing you can do with the energy is sell it back to the utility because there is no on-site load.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a very brief.
Wait, hold on.
Sorry.
Do you want to make a comment? Yes, you do, apparently. Mr. Lee, go ahead. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Howard Lee. I'm a resident of Palo Alto, and I also work in the renewals business. And I would like to echo what Craig has just talked about in terms of PV projects in Palo Alto and the city of Palo Alto utilities and property owners. I work at a company that's up the peninsula that also works with property owners and PV, and we help them sort of work on the economics as well as deployment of solar. With the help of the City of Palo Alto Utilities, and we've been working with them, we would at least like to say that we should continue the program with the Palo Alto Clean. And I think one of the key areas I think was mentioned before is that time is really necessary for not only education, but for a lot of the property owners to get comfortable with a business model that's not just rent. And as Craig mentioned, one of the areas that property owners understand, they understand rent. They understand monthly rent. So if a third party wants to use the rooftop, they could be happy with that as long as the economics work. And so there's a little bit of education there. If the property owners end up wanting to, for example, own the system, then they have to understand some of the nuances of what it takes to own PV in terms of either financing it, the tax incentives, in terms of the investment tax credit and so forth. So what I'm trying to say is I think having it extend for at least another year, I think will have a big benefit, because I think based on our discussions and based on what we've seen in terms of what's possible, I think the opportunities will come. It just takes a little time. I think this year will be a good year. That's all I'd like to say.
Great. Thank you very much for your comment.
Okay, I have a very brief presentation on this item. Just quickly, the background, you may recall at the beginning of 2012, the council first adopted the CLEAN program and established a rate of 14 cents a kilowatt hour, which we thought at that time would be sufficient. It turned out not to be. So at the end of that year, 2012, council decided to increase the rate to the price to 17.5 cents a kilowatt hour, and to lower the risk of increasing that price, they reduced the cap for the program to 10 megawatts from the original 4 megawatts. And at the same time that they increased the price, they directed staff to return to the council in 1 year or when the 2 megawatt cap was reached. And so here we are back 1 year later. No one has participated in the program, but the year is up, and so we're back to get further direction on what to do. And so we looked again at this. The one thing we noticed, and this is outlined in the report, is that the value of the local renewable energy has gone down since last year somewhat. So last year when the 16.5-cent price was established, the value, just the pure economic value, and that's the value of all the local attributes, avoided losses, avoided transmission costs, was about 11.6 cents. Now with the reduced prices we've seen in remote renewable projects, the local value has gone down to 9.96 cents a kilowatt hour. So we looked at options on what to do about that. And if what we're recommending is to retain that same price as 16.5 cents and retain the 2 megawatt cap on the program to limit the risk. Now the sort of extra cost for the program would increase from the estimate a year ago because of the reduced prices for remote renewables. So it's going to cost a little bit more for if we do get the 2 megawatts, but we think that reducing it, it's just not the right time to reduce it since we haven't had any uptake for the program right now. And so we're recommending, and there is a small rate impact, but this is what we recommend that council consider, that's a small enough rate impact that this is that the 2 megawatt cap is just not, it's sort of de minimis, this impact. So that's what we're recommending. And I think the report contains what that impact is for someone's bill, and it's very small. It's $1.60 a year for a customer using about 650 kilowatt hours a year. So it's fairly small. So that is our recommendation.
Mr. Chair, I move that we adopt the staff recommendation and forward to council our recommendation that the program be continued under the current terms and conditions. And I guess I'll just make a comment regarding my motion, and that is we started this off using cost-based pricing. Now we've moved toward market-based pricing, and you almost think it's 16.5 enough since the market hasn't yet responded to that price signal, but based on the inputs from our two speakers, it appears to me that there is professional opinion that 16.5 cents will prove to be enough as the market matures to this concept. So I feel like that there's no basis at all for reducing the price. That just kills the program. So I think we continue at the present price.
So following our procedure, I'll second that motion, and now let's go to comments, discussion. Commissioner Eglash.
Well, for me, the dilemma is not whether or not to continue the program, but at what price. And my recollection of the prior discussion that the Commission had is that there was considerable concern and angst about a price for local solar that's above the value of the solar that we can buy on the market. The number that's currently estimated at 9.9 cents a kilowatt hour. Let's make sure we all have in front of us what it means. If we pay more than 9.9 cents per kilowatt hour, it means that we're saying that we're willing to have the ratepayers subsidize and transfer wealth to the property owners. We're saying that we're so eager to have local solar in Palo Alto that we're willing to subsidize it by charging the ratepayers to do it. And I think we all agree that we're willing to subsidize it to some degree. And so the question is, at least the thing that concerns me, is how much money are we willing to transfer from the ratepayers to the property owners in order to encourage and incentivize them to put PV panels on their roofs? And so I struggle with this. I would love to see Palo Alto Clean succeed. I would love to see more local solar, but we're signing long-term contracts that obligate our ratepayers to subsidize it. We're paying more than it would cost us to get that same green power off the grid. On the other hand, I think the comments that we heard about the need to provide consistency and predictability are absolutely correct. I think when people are trying to make financial decisions, they need some visibility in doing this. I have the feeling that the proposal in front of us is perhaps both too aggressive in the 16.5 cents and too conservative and cautious in only allowing 2 megawatts and only going out to 2014. And I guess I would hope that someone from staff could perhaps comment, and I know it's dangerous to speculate in real time in front of the public, but here we are. What would your reaction be to a counter proposal that says, okay, fine, we'll keep it at 16.5 cents and 2 megawatts through the end of 2014, or maybe if 16.5 cents feels a little rich, maybe we put it at 15 cents, but some reasonably generous per kilowatt hour rate in the range of 15 or 16.5 cents a kilowatt hour through the end of 2014. But what if we were to also decide tonight at the same time to extend the program for another 3 years to 2017, but at a price where the premium is more modest, something like 12 cents a kilowatt hour? And what if in doing that also, we increase the cap to some meaningful number? Because let's face it, 2 megawatts is just a drop in the bucket. So an example of what I have in mind as a counter proposal would be 15 cents a kilowatt hour till the end of 2014, keeping the same 2 megawatt cap, and 12 cents a kilowatt hour for 3 additional years to 2017 at, say, a 10 megawatt cap. What would your reaction to something like that be, where I made it a little less attractive for the next year and a half in an effort to not charge our ratepayers quite so much of a penalty, but address the issue of long-term predictability by extending it out several more years, albeit at a much lower level?
Well, first of all, I want to make it clear that this is not a program that ends in 2014. There is no such recommendation. So what this recommendation is to keep it at 16.5 until we get 2 megawatts. That could be in 3 months or 6 months or 3 years or something. But we would come back in a year if we didn't get those 2 megawatts.
Right. If I can interrupt just to explain. Actually, one of my motivations in structuring it the way I did was to state loudly and publicly that the 15 cent or 16.5 cent rate is only available for a finite period, so as to try to create a sense of urgency for developers to move and to move now. I think your point is well taken that as worded, this doesn't end in 2014, and if there's still no takers through the end of 2014, you can come back to us a year from now and we can vote to continue it through 2015 and beyond at 16.5 cents a kilowatt hour. But it seemed to me that one of the interesting elements of my counter proposal was in fact that we would be committing now to pricing for several years and telling them that this particularly attractive price, the one that I'm concerned is an onerous burden on the ratepayers, the 15 or 16.5 cents, is only available through the end of 2014. Basically stating now, on January 1st, 2015, the price goes down to, I'm suggesting 12 cents a kilowatt hour, but something that carries a penalty and cost to our ratepayers that I find more rational than the 15 or 16.5 cents.
I mean, I think that would be interesting for you as the UAC to discuss that. I'll just say that I think it would be very interesting if we got a huge run on this program and we ran out of the 2 megawatt quickly, and then you might say, oh, the price is too high. And when we come back with the program having capped out at 2 megawatts, then we could have that discussion. And so I guess my bias is really to get somebody on the program. And so we can rejigger things after we actually have some experience with the program. But you're certainly welcome to come up with any other recommendation you wish for the council.
I guess I just want to point out for the sake of the discussion that we're embarking on here, we certainly contemplated at prior meetings what happens if you put this at 20 or 30 cents a kilowatt hour. We understood that we had a knob here that we could turn to guarantee participation. And it was my sense, and I think the sense of some of my colleagues, that it was not our goal to get participation at any price. It was the reason we adopted such a conservative price, in my recollection, was twofold. We had outside experts who felt that the price was probably adequate to get some takers, and those of us who are really concerned about subsidizing local solar, about that transfer of wealth between different classes of ratepayers, were willing to sign on only because the price was so modest.
I was just going to suggest that the Finance Committee actually shared your concern, and in fact, that's why you'll see in December 2012, they said, come back if you don't have any takers, or come back if you hit the 2 megawatt cap, and their whole intent, as I recall that discussion, was to lower the price for the next tranche. So if you're suggesting that we time limit this price, I think that's very doable. I don't know if you want to already stick out what the next price tranche is going to be. That's the only thing I don't think we necessarily analyzed.
Commissioner Waldvogel.
I'm sorry, just a point of information. How many projects would the 2 megawatt cap, or how many projects that we're discussing would it take to fill that 2 megawatt cap? What's the average size of the projects that are being explored right now?
So I've asked marketing engineer Lindsay Joy, who is in charge of all of our PV programs, to come up here and address us.
Should I speak from here? Okay. Good evening. So we're looking at larger commercial-sized projects, and we could get that in 1 to 3 projects, but we are also hearing from more medium-sized customers about the potential for them to participate as well. And so it could be more numbers, like 20 or so. But I could see it going in as little as, 2 or 3 projects.
And do you have any comment about what Mr. Lewis said, that it's not economics that's driving the property owners? I mean, if it's not economics, then what is it?
Because that's not their core area of business, I believe there is a learning curve and a time to think about, do they want to use their roof for communication leases? Do they want to expand these business opportunities to partner with solar developers or just take it as a straight rental opportunity.
But do we believe they'd be less inclined to do this at Commissioner Eglash's proposed price? Would they be less inclined to do this at 15 cents than 16 cents? I mean, people are not less inclined to buy Priuses because they cost more money.
I think it's the solar developers that are motivated by the price signal that are going out and talking with the property owners. And so the property owners aren't necessarily following the price signal and deciding whether to participate or not. It's how good the deal can be crafted and then brought to them for them to entertain whether that roof lease is attractive to them. So eventually, yes, I think although our price signal will make it less likely for them to participate, but right now I think it has to still do with finding property owners, especially those that aren't our utility customers, because they're probably better suited for this program than the net metered systems where they can take the energy on site and hedge against future rate increases. So we're looking for property owners that don't already pay utility bills as being a special good candidate for this program.
So just one final comment. I think that to Commissioner Eglash's point, I think it would be possibly awkward from a public relations wealth transfer standpoint if one developer were to take half or 2/3 of this program. And I think that if we were to envision 20 smaller projects, that might be more palatable than one or two people taking the bulk of this and taking the bulk of this, what is the number potentially, $200,000 subsidy.
Can I just say, that's a lot more staff work when you have a lot more contracts. So it's just another reality for us. But yes,
right,
I understand
but
what you're saying.
we set a minimum size. I think it was 50,000 watts was the...
I think we've gotten rid of the
No,
minimum, didn't
we
we?
got rid of the minimum, and in fact, it's open to residents. We just don't think that smaller projects, or certainly residential-sized ones, would really pencil out for this, and I don't think we're going to have 20. I just don't think we're going to get the really small projects. I think it's going to be probably 4 or 5 projects to use up 2 megawatts.
So I'll chime in with a few comments. Commissioner Eglash, I understand your point on this. I share Commissioner Melton's view on this matter. I think we should go with a staff recommendation in terms of the cross-subsidization. I think the subsidization of folks participating in this program is quite small in the grand scheme of things. We do subsidize folks. We've been subsidizing solar, residential solar for years, and commercial solar, and others of the solar PV rebate program here. So I'm comfortable with it. I agree with the approach of hopefully over time lowering the price, to your point, Commissioner Eglash, but I think the way of saying 2 megawatts at the current, and then and am I understand that correctly, 2 megawatts at the current, and then we'd be filled up, and then we'd reevaluate. I actually think that's exactly the way to go. I think the reality is we have no takers at 16.5 cents. I don't think lowering it to 12 or 15 helps. So I'd say leave it where it is. That's my 2 cents, or maybe my 1.5 cents. Any comments over you here?
Just briefly, I'm fine with going ahead. I'll vote for the recommendation for the proposals. However, a year from now, if we happen to fill that 2 megawatts or close to it, and we're talking about maybe extending that to a much bigger amount at the same price, I would be very uncomfortable at that price. It's a very high premium to pay. That I don't want to take anything away from the fact that I will support the motion.
And I do share the concerns that Commissioner Eglash raised, and I do support that eventual sort of lowering of the price and considering some sort of ratcheting, whether it's by time period or maybe by blocks, whether it's another 2 megawatt block or even a smaller amount or something like that. But I would encourage that ratcheting down at when there's some pickup and perhaps over time.
Any other comments?
I wanted to understand what Commissioner Chang just said. You would support staff's motion, and then once the 2 megawatt cap has been reached, you'd like to see rationing down, or you meant to say you don't support staff motion because you want to start rationing immediately? I didn't understand your comment.
I think I'm in the place where I would support staff's recommendation at this point, but I do share your concerns that you raised, that I don't think it makes sense to keep the price so high for an extended period of time. Once there's additional pickup, ratcheting the price down for additional amounts in the future, I think would make sense.
Thanks for the clarification. And I actually think all 6 of us are on the same page right now. I also respect that that there is a lot of value to maintaining, to staff's proposal, because it allows us to maintain the status quo for 1 more year. We've heard from several people tonight that believe that the demand is right on the doorstep, is right on the edge. And although it is an awfully aggressive price, it would be nice to see if we can get some takers and not douse with water something that is maybe just beginning to come about. Also, I think we've made it amply clear to everyone tonight who's paying attention that there's just no way this price is going to be around for long. They're kidding themselves if they think this price is going to be around till 2020. There's a time limit before we'd need to renew it. There's a cap before we'd need to extend beyond the cap, and clearly there are a lot of people here who are going to be concerned about doing so. So I think whether we're talking to the Finance Committee and City Council or we're talking to potential developers, I think it's clear that this is a limited time offer.
Let me just test one thesis. So if we are willing to offer 16.5 cents into a 2 megawatt cap, would we support 18 cents into the first megawatt and 15 cents into the second megawatt?
My sense is that from the folks that we heard from today, that the price wasn't necessarily, the economics weren't exactly the driving factor at this point. So from my perspective, I don't think that a higher price in this first.
But if that's
block
true, we could take the whole thing to 15.
So I am not eager to see us sell anything at 18 cents. As you've heard, I'm not even totally happy with 16.5 cents. I'm agreeing to it for the sake of continuity going back to 2012 and providing some predictability to developers who are in the midst of considering this, who otherwise have to go back and modify their spreadsheets that they've been working on for the last few months. And so my support to 16.5 cents, albeit uncomfortable, is because that's what we've been offering for the last year.
Any other comments? Okay, motion on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous. Okay. Anyone have comments on topics for discussion at the next UAC or a future UAC meeting, I should say? Any commissioner comments? I actually do have one, but anyone else have a commissioner comment?
I do. I don't think there was a handout today of the roster of future topics, so I'm working. Is it?
I think there is, actually.
There is?
You mean this thing, the rolling calendar?
Yeah.
It's somewhere there in the pile.
I correct it. I do have it. All right, so what I was looking for, maybe somebody could just walk me. I was interested in looking at the smart grid strategy. I think we brought this up maybe a few months ago. It may be on here, maybe not. At some point, a briefing. I realized it would be something that is not high priority, but I would be interested in it. I'm not seeing it, so I'd like to add it at a convenient time.
You know, we usually do include information, at least on our smart grid pilot, in our quarterly reports, but were you thinking of something a little bit different?
I would like to have perhaps a dialogue with staff as to how things are going, where, what the direction is, how it's working out.
I'm sure we could work that in.
Okay.
Director Fong, we have here in December the UAC meeting. Next month, the UAC will, part of the agenda will be the Palo Alto Green Gas Program. Is that correct, up to date?
Yes, it is.
Will that be for discussion or potentially for approval and forwarding to council?
It is for action.
For action. Then in January, we have local solar strategy. Is that community solar or is that something else?
Well, you just have to wait and see.
Ooh, how exciting.
It will probably include some element of community solar, but I actually have not myself seen the strategy as yet.
have to remember that. When someone asks me a question at my company I don't know, I'll just say, have to wait and see. That's a very good one. I will share with my colleagues that something that I've discussed with the director and assistant director is the Palo Alto Green Program. Director Waltogel, Commissioner Wolfogel and Eglash. Just bear with me for 1 minute, and then I promise we'll be out of here in a second. Then I do continue to feel we should continue to look if there is some future of the Palo Alto Green Electric Program. Now, not in any way in the form it's been. That's dead and gone. But is it just gone, or is there some other creative thing we can do with Palo Alto Green on the electric side? We're obviously moving forward. Hopefully we'll be moving forward on the gas side. And so I would encourage folks who have ideas on that to let Director Fong know, and we can discuss down the road. Commissioner Eglash?
Well, my recollection from the discussion is that there were a number of ideas that staff had developed that simply weren't ready to be implemented yet. So I believe staff has this in front of them and they're working actively on it, and consistent with the other demands on their time, I expect that in the months ahead we'll be hearing from staff. I know that there's considerable enthusiasm around the various community solar ideas that would allow people to group together. We have to be careful to not go too far. This isn't an agendized item. That would allow people to group together to deploy solar on properties other than their own. So I certainly hope we're going to be hearing from staff in the future.
You should have kept going, because I think the new city attorney was about to jump in and for her first, official duty and yank you off.
Go ahead. Say it. This is not an agendized item. You can't discuss it.
This meeting is scheduled to end at 8:30. It is 8:31. The meeting is adjourned.